Warning, we are not your attorneys. Please, don't take anything we say as legal advice. I'm Jeff.
I'm Mike.
And I'm Derek.
And you are listening to the Not So Grand Jury,
which is now sponsored by Moore PLCAA. And we're back. All right, everybody. We are here for a super fun, relatively quick sidebar. You've got all three members of the Not So Grand Jury, but you also have my sister, Colleen Moore, who is also our unpaid editor. Not that any of us are paid, but she also qualifies as another unpaid member of the Not So Grand Jury. Brief backstory: when we were contemplating having the Not So Grand Jury come back, one of the reasons was because basically Jeff didn't want to hear his own voice when he was editing, so we wanted to find an editor. I asked my sister if she knew of any editors, and she looked at me weird and said that she could do it, and that was how this started.
It's a real Dick Cheney moment.
It was a moment. Let's put it that way.
I have never been referred to as Dick Cheney, and I hope I never am again.
Wow.
We're starting strong. Colleen, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah,
I guess that's a welcome if I ever heard one. There's basically, once she said she was willing to edit for basically $0 American or any other dollars, I said, yeah, whatever you want to do. And we are now about 15 episodes in, and she said, I got an idea. How about that we do a couple episodes of my choosing? So she basically called our bluff, and starting next week, she's going to be a guest host for a couple weeks on some Law & Order SVU episodes. So we thought it would make sense for us to actually introduce her and allow her to come on and tell us who she is. And second, we have a fun little sidebar based on one of our conversations in Runaway Jury from last week that she's going to add a lot more information on that we did not have at the time we were recording, and I'm sure she can make it a lot more intellectual and a lot more entertaining. So, Colleen, come on in, tell us about yourself and why the heck you're here.
Yeah, so I don't bring a lot as far as the legal aspects of it. Literally for Law & Order SVU, I told Derek, I was like, my experience is that I have watched Law & Order SVU like dozens of times over. And yeah, I just know the episodes, so back and forth. But for one of the episodes I specifically picked one that was related to Abu Ghraib, and the torture program under the Bush administration, because my career has been predominantly in international peace building and disarmament. So human rights, conflict resolution, conventional nuclear disarmament. In my current role, I cover all international peace building, the whole world essentially, and some other disarmament issues like gun violence prevention. So it was funny, as I was editing last week's episode on Runaway Jury and Mike was talking about the PLCAA PLCAA, I was like, oh, I know of that. I've done work to repeal that bill that was passed in 2005 because predominantly in my role, I do policy advocacy. So I work with Congress and the executive branch as well as manage our grassroots. So I can get into it, talk a little bit about this bill and some efforts to on the bill that I've worked on to repeal PLCAA. So as Mike was saying in the episode, the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act, I'm just going to refer to it as PLCAA. I think we've discovered that saying the acronym PLCAA is not going to go over well.
Mike did have various versions of it, from PLCAA to PLACC to, and my favorite quote, whatever the fuck the acronym is.
Yeah.
So
that sounds right.
Actually, Mike, can you just slowly and clearly say PLCAA into your microphone so we can drop it in?
What if I just refuse?
Points? I mean, I guess that's valid.
PLCAA. Ah, fuck. All right. PLA. Was it?
I can't even.
And put $1 in the mic jar.
Now I'm overthinking it. It was a PLAC.
PLCAA, Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act.
PLCAA.
There you go.
There we go.
Perfect. Okay.
Thank you.
Anyway, so now that we know how to say it, that only took longer than it should have. Now Colleen can say what the hell it does and why she doesn't like it.
So when I was researching this, I had no idea you had this background. I totally would have gone to you as the resource.
Oh, no, it's okay. Yeah, I didn't realize as I had watched Runaway Jury, and I don't think it really dawned on me that this was it until you were talking about it. So, okay, what this is, it's a federal law that grants immunity to gun manufacturers, distributors, dealers, and importers from civil liability related to the unlawful misuse of their products. It aims to prevent lawsuits against the gun industry, essentially, based solely on the criminal or unlawful misuse of firearms. So this bill was originally passed in 2005. It was signed into law in 2005. And there has been renewed interest over the last decade or so in repealing the law, especially after the Sandy Hook and Aurora, Colorado shootings, to allow victims of mass shootings to sue the gun industry. So the Aurora, 2012 Aurora shooting was Brady, the organization Brady, as well as families of victims, sued Lucky Gunner, the online store where some of the ammunition was purchased, but a federal judge dismissed the charges. You covered the Sandy Hook case as well. And then there was also one around the Sutherland Springs Texas Baptist Church shooting in 2017. So a lawsuit by victims of the shooting against the gun shop that sold the gun has been allowed to proceed because the shooter used a Colorado driver's license as identification to purchase the gun, which had a 30-round magazine as standard. But in sales of firearms to the resident of another state, the sale must comply with the laws of both the sellers and the purchaser's states. So Colorado law prohibits the sale of magazines capable of holding more than 15 rounds. So there has been both legal challenges to PLCAA and some ways around it. And then there's also been congressional efforts to repeal PLCAA at the federal level. So in the last Congress, in the 118th, there was a bill from Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut, who does a lot around gun violence prevention since Sandy Hook especially. And at the time, Representative Adam Schiff, who is now a senator, they introduced a bill called the Equal Access to Justice for Victims of Gun Violence Act of 2023 that would ensure that victims of gun violence have their day in court and that negligent gun companies and gun sellers are not shielded from liability when they disregard public safety, and it would ultimately repeal PLCAA. So a quote from Senator Murphy, who's the other Connecticut senator, also done a lot on gun violence. There's absolutely no reason why the gun industry should get special treatment when it comes to negligence. Their immunity from lawsuits effectively gives them a license to kill. It's past time for Congress to repeal PLCAA and allow gun violence victims their day in court. So when Congress first passed this back in 2005, the supporters argued that it was necessary to protect the gun industry from frivolous lawsuits. Like even Bernie Sanders was in support of PLCAA back then.
He was very pro-gun for a long time.
Well, not even in support of it. Well, he actually fully voted for PLCAA, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, he voted for it.
Yes.
I think he's actually been one of the tougher ones, I think, to get around to certain gun violence prevention laws. I'm not sure where he was at with this one to repeal PLCAA. I think he was challenged by it, and like Hillary in the 2016 elections over his support for it.
Was it prompted by a specific case, PLCAA?
I think, it was really just the power of the gun industry. I don't think there was any one case. There was always a priority of theirs.
So when I looked at the history of there's the history of the tobacco legislation where people were suing the tobacco industry to try and bring them down. And I think that the gun industry saw a couple early cases forming. And I had, in my old notes, I had some of the history of this, but like nothing really mounted, but it was definitely like they could see where the wind was blowing.
Right.
Okay. And they thought, we want some of that. Okay.
Well, and by the way, for the record, but just for the note, it wasn't a close vote either in the House or Senate. It was overwhelmingly passed. And I think like Bernie Sanders, I think his argument at the time was essentially like, if a bad thing, like if a gun or a whatever it is gets in the hands of a bad guy, you don't sue the person who gave it to him. You sue the person that used it. So his argument, as I recalled before the 2016 presidential, like the Democratic primaries, was basically like if someone beats someone else over the head with a hammer, you don't sue the hammer manufacturer, you sue the person.
Right.
Now, I think guns is a little different from what I can tell.
I mean, as attorneys, we sue, going back to the King of the Hill episode, is we sue the person that has the money.
Correct.
The one who can pay.
Right. And I mean, like, there are examples of, hammer is not a good example, but of something that, could cause a much bigger harm, much easier to people.
Right.
There are certainly scenarios where you can be found liable for strict liability and other reasons that would be reason to be able to go after the manufacturer. But that was, from my understanding, that was kind of the argument when it was passed, right? Was basically like, stop all the quote unquote nuisance suits against the manufacturers.
Right. And one of the problems was the supporters said that victims of gun violence would not be shut out of the courts. So I think that kind of placated some people that had concerns. However, in reality, since it has passed, there have been many, many cases that have been dismissed on the basis of PLCAA and have shut out victims of gun violence. So, that was even in cases when gun dealers and manufacturers acted in a fashion that would qualify as negligent if it involved any other product. So victims have been denied the right to even discover or introduce evidence. And so it allows civil cases to go forward against irresponsible bad actors, the one to repeal PLCAA. So unfortunately, the legislation, of course, only had Democrat support in the House and Senate, so it never had a chance of being passed in the last Congress. And especially now in a Republican trifecta, even seemingly basic gun control legislation, like there's another bill I work on safe storage called Ethan's Law, even that we can't even get Republican support. And even when we did have a Democratic Senate, for example, it was tough because of the filibuster. Like in 2023, the assault weapons ban and the universal background checks bill were brought to the floor under unanimous consent. But of course, Republican senators blocked it. And this is despite 92% of Americans being in favor of requiring background checks for firearm sales. So something like this, unfortunately, doesn't really have a chance of passing. I'm not sure of the chance of it even being introduced. I don't know the priority of the senators and representatives on this. I still think it's good to have it, to be having these conversations. But with the lack of progress at the federal level, it's really happening at the state level. So in recent years, a lot of states have enacted victims' access to justice laws that codify standards of responsible conduct for the firearm industry and ensure that more victims can bring civil suits seeking justice. And so right now, 32 states provide broad immunity to the gun industry in a way that's very similar to PLCAA, or it prohibits cities or other local government entities from bringing lawsuits against at least some of the gun industry defendants. And then other states have enacted laws that go even further, some that even have punitive provisions that force victims who do attempt to file lawsuits to pay the defendants legal fees and costs, which happened in the Aurora, Colorado case. At the time, it's now repealed. They did have a punitive gun industry immunity law. The parents of a victim who was shot and killed, who sued the companies, were bankrupted and they lost their home after being forced under Colorado's law to pay more than $200,000 to the companies. So yeah, you can't even sue them without, the possibility of losing your home and owing the legal fees. But beginning in 2021, there was then a big backlash to that. So a lot of states have enacted legislation to expand the ability of victims or public officials to bring civil lawsuits against firearm industry actors for illegal conduct. So California, Colorado, Delaware, Hawaii, Illinois, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, Washington have laws, and California has also enacted 2 other laws that expressly authorize lawsuits against firearm industry defendants in certain cases. And so I do think there are certain key states in the next few years, while we can't really make a lot of progress at the federal level, I think there's a possibility of state level legislation moving. I think like Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Maine, Arizona, and Minnesota. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be easier than federal legislation. And so we could see possibly something, even some other gun control, like safe storage or background checks, passing in some of these states. So getting back to the movie, I do think Runaway Jury really portrayed the impact of guns and just the importance of fighting the good fight, even when you're really up against it, when the chances of repealing it are so low. It's going to be a many-year slog through court cases that are probably not going to end up the way that it did in the movie. And the reality is it's the right thing to do. I mean, the gun industry is contributing to more gun deaths. They're literally profiting off of gun violence. And I believe we should do anything we can to fight this. There was actually a quote from, I think it was Dustin Hoffman's character. Towards the end, there's going to be another shooting, and it's not going to let up until we demand a change. So yeah, that's a little bit about some of the work I've done to repeal PLCAA, and we'll see how it goes.
And this, listener, is why we have guests on the show, because they actually know stuff about the things that we talk about. So this was fantastic, Colleen. Thank you so much. You will be hearing more from her in the next couple of weeks when we talk about the different SVU episodes. Yeah. Mike, Jeff, anything to add? Any excitement? Mike, what is it? PLCAC, ACC, CCA?
The NCAA.
So it's the NAACP, NBA lottery. Sixers got the third pick. Woo!
Yep. Oh my God. God help us all. Anyway, that was fun. Thank you, Colleen. We will be talking to you shortly.
Thank you, Colleen. That was very interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, no, very, very helpful.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. And this, again, just shows why we bring in guests. So thank you. We'll be talking to you next week. The Not So Grand Jury is sponsored by Morwa PLLC.
The opinions expressed in the Not So Grand Jury are those of the hosts themselves and not of their respective employers.
The theme music for the Not So Grand Jury is from Gustav Holst's Jupiter and is in the public domain.
If you'd like to get in touch with us, if you want to suggest future movies, or even if you want to offer corrections, you can email us at notsograndjury@gmail.com or message us on any of our social media accounts.
The Not So Grand Jury is copyright 2025, all rights reserved.